Hello, I am Nick Huzar, the host of StuffTV, and I'm also the co-founder of OfferUp, which is the largest local marketplace in the U.S. And after spending over a decade watching billions of dollars of transactions occur on the platform that I started thinking a lot about my own existence and how I impact the planet. Thought I could Google this and found it really hard to find answers. So decided to start this podcast and interview really interesting thought leaders to help enlighten us and take this complex problem around climate and make it interesting and simple and just have an open discussion. And today I'm really excited to have Ina Braverman with us from Eco Wave Power. And there's lots of ways to harness energy. I do think energy storage and collection is going to be the biggest challenge of our time. So I'm really passionate about this topic and excited to have Ina with us today to dive in. And so thank you for being here. Thank you for talking about this topic. And how did you get into this business? I mean, I know you had a long history from your childhood, but it'd be great to hear that story again.
Great being here. So basically, I live in Israel, and I'm talking to you now from Israel, but I wasn't born here. I was actually born in Ukraine in 1986. And 2 weeks after I was born, the Chernobyl nuclear reactor exploded, which was the largest in history nuclear disaster in terms of costs and casualties. And I was one of the babies that got hurt from the negative effects of the explosion. So basically one day my mom, she approached my crib, she looked down at me and she saw I was pale and blue and not breathing. I basically had a respiratory arrest and a clinical death. And luckily my mother, she's a nurse, so she gave me a mouth-to-mouth resuscitation until the ambulance came and basically saved my life. So I don't remember any of that, I was a baby, but growing up, the family gatherings and meetups, everybody would say, wow, it's so cool, you got a second chance in life, like you should really do something good with it. And that's kind of the feeling that I grew up with, like, wow, that's a big thing, I got a second chance in life. And when I was 4 years old, my family immigrated from the Ukraine to Israel, to a very, very small town in the north of Israel that's called Akko. Growing up there, it was a super small city with no startups, technology, ventures, this kind of language wasn't really used or known, definitely not renewable energy at the time. So when I grew up, I decided to actually study political science in Haifa University in Israel. And I thought to myself, okay, that will be my way of kind of changing the world through, making peace in the Middle East or making something that's really, really big in politics. And when I finished my first degree, it was in political science and English literature. I found out that no lineup of politicians are waiting to hire a young lady with a major in political science and English language and literature. So I went to look for a job, and my first job was as English Hebrew translator for a renewable energy company. And there I kind of, discovered the whole amazing world of renewable energy. And whereas solar energy and wind energy were amazing and incredible sources, but it seemed like there's not too much that you can, innovate in those fields. Everybody were using very similar technologies and kind of fighting for the same energy production quotas. Everybody wanted the same project and all these big companies were fighting for it. And when you looked at wave energy, you saw that kind of the whole world really wants it and believes in it, engineers, scientists, and so on. But although there's a huge demand, and although according to the World Energy Council, wave energy can produce twice the amount of electricity that the world produces now, that's insane in terms of electricity amounts.
The potential's there, right? But we're not literally there yet, but the potential.
Exactly. And nobody was actually doing it. And I saw that all the big companies in the wave energy field, no matter how much budget they had and how much human resources and other resources they had, technical expertise and so on, no one was able to make wave energy a reality, really commercialize wave energy. So I saw a very, very interesting kind of, market segment where there's a huge demand, but really no supply for that demand. And, I was 24 years old. And, we were kind of naive at this age in a positive way sometimes.
Well, you knew since you were born you're going to change the world. It was built in.
Kind of. So I said to myself that, I don't have the funding, I don't have the technical background back then, I didn't have the contacts or, anything else that's probably needed. But I said to myself, they cannot make wave energy happen, I can make wave energy happen. And I really started researching in databases, books, anything that I could find about wave energy to see what went wrong, where other companies have failed or didn't succeed. And I found kind of 5 problems that really prevented the commercialization of wave energy. Started to thinking to myself, if I can find a technology that kind of combines the solution for these 5 problems, that I'm catching waves. I actually find a way to potentially commercialize wave energy. And I came up with my own ideas. I'm not an engineer, so I couldn't make like blueprints and sketches and so on. And I didn't have the funding to even register a patent back then. But then I met my business partner. His name is David Leb. He's a serial entrepreneur. He ended up investing the first $1 million into the company, and that was actually the beginning of EcoWave Power.
Wow. And I recall, I think, I did a little research on this, and tell me if this is correct. It seemed like a lot of the existing wave companies that were out there were doing it more offshore. Was that kind of one of the first aha things you had, or were other people also doing it more like how you set up your company, which is more on, literally like right off the side of
So you're absolutely right. And 99% of the competitors decided to go into the offshore, which like kind of is in the middle of the sea or the middle of the ocean. So when they decided to go that far into the sea or the ocean, they faced like 5 big problems. So the first one was the price of the systems, because when you go that far into the sea or the ocean, the prices become sky high. You need ships, you need divers, you need underwater mooring and cables. The construction, the operation and maintenance, like everything becomes difficult. The second problem was really the survivability of these systems, because in the offshore you have waves sometimes of 20 meters and even higher. And unfortunately, no man-made equipment can survive the loads of a 20 meters wave height. So many of those companies, like for example Pelamis, which was a very famous offshore wave energy company from Scotland that built kind of a big red snake, they invested around $150 million in development costs in like a few hundred kilowatt technology, which is kind of small, with never ROI in that prices, but they still decided to build it with the hope that it will start high and go down. It broke down after 3 days of operation on the coastline of Portugal. So $150 million total loss within 3 days of operation. Because again, 20 meters.
Well, and bringing the energy all the way, bringing the energy all the way back in seems challenging as well.
Exactly. So that kind of the third challenge. So most of those companies, they got so preoccupied with trying to lower the costs that were high as is and surviving, that most of them never got the chance to connect to the electrical grid. That was an additional cost and an additional problem. So there became a big question mark on whether wave energy, offshore wave energy, can even safely connect to the electrical grid. Environmentalists, which were supposed to be the greatest supporters and proponents of offshore wave energy, were actually, some of them were actually objecting it, because it created a new presence on the ocean floor, which disturbed the marine environment. And the insurance companies were reluctant of insuring offshore wave energy technologies because, very high prices, breaking down very often. That's not exactly a great insurance case. So that became an additional problems for wave energy, because like if you can't insure it, like how can you get like funding for it easily, or securing funding for large scale multi-million dollars project. So that's kind of the 5 problems that really dominated the market. And really a big amount of those problems, I think, is derived from the fact that technologies were operational offshore.
Offshore. So your big aha was, let's reduce the cost. Let's just put it onshore. You could probably install it much faster, right? You can transfer energy better. You can get it insured easier.
Yeah. So our kind of, let's call it, unique selling points were not only in the fact that it's only onshore, but that we came up with different additional mechanisms and complementary technologies that enable to solve different problems. So in terms of the price, you're absolutely right. Like the fact that we're onshore, it's much cheaper. You don't need ships, you don't need divers, you don't need underwater works and cables. So that definitely makes the work more cost efficient. But also what we did is that we actually decided to only put the floaters in the water, and all the expensive conversion mechanism, the generators, the hydraulics, everything is on land, just like a regular power station. That's very different than what the offshore companies did, because most of them put all the conversion equipment inside the floater. So when the floater was damaged, there was a total loss to the system. In our case, it wasn't. Plus, we could use much more standard equipment, because it didn't need to take the strong heats and the loads that are inside the floater. They could actually be on land and work just like a regular power station. So that's kind of the reasoning behind the decrease of the cost. And other than that, we were able to achieve higher reliability and survivability because we came up with a patented storm protection mechanism. So when the waves are too high for the system to handle, the floaters automatically basically lift above the water level and they stay in the upward position until the storm passes. When the storm passes, the floaters go back into the water and commence operation. So
That's
that's
pretty cool.
definitely an additional advantage of the technology. Because we showed that we're reliable and we're cost efficient, we were able to obtain insurance, which was a big deal, insuring our first wave energy installation. Environmentalists are supporting us because we don't create any new presence on the seabed. We only connect to existent man-made structures. It's kind of cement blocks or stones in the water that's not exactly environmentally friendly, but we have to build it in order to protect ports and coastal populations. So we take something that is not prime real estate and is not used for anything and is actually damaging the environment and turn it into a source of clean electricity and a source of revenues. And we have been connected to the grid for 6 years in Gibraltar and now connected to the grid also in Israel, showing that wave energy can safely connect to the electrical grid. So that's kind of our difference from the previous technologies and how we solve the problems.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting, and we'll show a video of this when we edit it, just kind of those floaters you have, and they're just basically just harnessing kinetic energy, as you kind of mentioned, right? And then they're just bringing it on shore. And if something's, if there's a big storm coming, that, right? And you just, it's really interesting insight on how to, just rethink a problem. And I think that's the fun stuff. I'm definitely an entrepreneur. I love innovation. I like looking at big problems and just going, do we need to do it that way? And it's cool that you took a very different approach to how to go about doing it. And it seems like there's probably a lot of places you can go, like you're talking about ports all over the world. And I don't know how big, how much land do you actually need to put these in? Are you taking out a sizable, side of the port to put these installations in?
So we don't actually take any prime real estate or any land. We take the actual marine structures, so breakwaters, piers, jetties, platforms, anything that's already in the water. So that's another advantage of the technology because, for example, at the density of the water is 832 times greater than the density of air. So already energy generation from water can produce much larger electricity amounts with much smaller devices because the density is much bigger, so less space is needed. Same in comparison to solar energy. Solar energy needs about 10 square meters per each 1 kilowatt of installed capacity, which is about a household. Wave energy in Gibraltar, when we put a power station with it. So solar energy needs about, as a rule of thumb, about 10 square meters per each 1 kilowatt of installed capacity. And in Gibraltar, for example, we installed 100 kilowatt of a pilot station, and the floaters were on a piece of breakwater that was about 20 square meters. So think that on 20 square meters, you can put about 2 kilowatt of solar or 100 kilowatt of waves. It's 50 times more energy on the same space.
Why do you think, when you look at just a macro level, all the different ways we harness energy, solar, wind, what do you think about just the overall economics of wave energy, right? Because back to what we talked about earlier, it seems like there were some earlier installations that were just maybe not the right approach, so they weren't as economical. And so wind is taken off, solar's taken off. That's been happening a long time. Do you feel like, you're in an innovative space that's, solving it differently, and so there's a bigger future as you think about scaling? I don't know the cost per kilowatt hour to roll out, say, eco wave power versus a solar wind farm, right? And so I'd be curious on any numbers that you think are interesting there.
So in terms of economics, it's very important that for us that we obtain prices that are competitive or comparable to other renewable energy sources, because we understand that no matter how much positive impact a technology can make, if it's not profitable or not cost efficient, it's not going to commercialize, because that's an important aspect in the end of the day. Every new technology, with that said, every new technology starts at usually higher prices. So if you're looking at solar or at wind, the prices when they started were astronomical, and the capacity factors, the actual production was pretty low because it was going through different improvements in terms of cost, in terms of production, in terms of anything that you can improve in a new technology. With that said, EcoWave Power was established in 2011. That's almost 12 years ago. And we already had time to wave pool testing and then real condition testing off grid. And then we were 6 years grid connected in Gibraltar, and now we're connected to the grid in Israel, and soon hopefully also in LA and the Port of Los Angeles and in Portugal. And we accumulated, I would say, significant time of real conditions experience that enabled us also, with the advantages of the technology, to reach prices that are already attractive. So in terms of the LCOE, the expected LCOE for a commercial scale installation, which is like 20 megawatt and up, is about 5 US dollar cents per kilowatt hour, which is about 4 euro cents, which is comparable to the prices of wind, for example.
Yeah, it's if you again you think of all the demands that are about to happen on our grid, especially in the U.S. We don't have a really good electrical grid. We have I think one of the best natural gas grids in the world, but not electricity. And you've got it's great to see this kind of evolution with EVs and how fast. I think we just passed about 5% of the EVs. Our cars are now EVs, but they say by I don't know what it is by 23. It is this crazy curve when you look at the growth trajectory of electric, and everything else is we have so many. I think about it, even my kids, the amount of things we have in our house, they're electronic, like everything's just pulling on this grid. So we need many different ways to harness energy, and it seems like wave power, especially on the West Coast, um, is going to be really essential. And as you think about your company, when you think about where to put these installments, like how do you go about doing that? How do you decide where to partner and where to put these?
So right now we're mostly focused on the European and the US markets, because Europe is the most advanced in the world in terms of regulation, legislation, policies, supportive feed-in
Yeah,
tariffs, grants for wave energy. And the United States also, because of the significant wave energy potential, but also because the new government in the United States is very supportive of renewable energy, such as the Inflation Reduction Act that recently became a historic legislation, and new legislation for wave energy specifically that is going through the Senate right now in both New Jersey and in California. So, and we really believe that once we open the first power station in Los Angeles, which will probably become the first onshore or nearshore wave energy power station in the country, it will draw significant attention from policymakers, legislators, financial institutions, and any other kind of bodies that can assist the commercialization of wave energy. And we really believe that what happens big in the United States happens big in other locations as well. So there's a big advantage in that as well. So these are the two key markets that we're focused at right now. But of course, as the company grows and as we reach more and more projects, we will also open to additional markets.
you're gonna do it. You're gonna do it at Alta Sea, right? I think Jenny who connected us, right?
Exactly, yes. So we're gonna do.
Yeah, I'm excited to come. I'm going to come down there. I think there's a big event in October. I want to come down and see it. And Jenny's awesome. We talked multiple times about just interesting things, and it seems like such a cool location that highlights the potential of our oceans. And I know that was passion for her. Is I want to create this to get people excited about the oceans because they're just so unexplored.
Definitely, both Terry and Jenny are doing a great job with the Alta Sea in the Port of Los Angeles. It's really great to see a hub that is fully focused on blue economy, because it's really like kind of an up and rising topic, not only for energy generation, but from ocean agriculture and for many other things that the ocean can give us. In the end of the day, two-thirds of the world population is living on the coastline. So definitely, there's a big room for kind of blue economy hubs, I think, everywhere in the world. And what AltaSea is doing is inspirational. And we're very
Yeah.
excited to have our first demonstration at AltaSea in the Port of Los Angeles.
Yeah, and what you talked about too, and I was talking about this a few times in the last few weeks, that how many people live around the equator and the record temperatures we've had in the world, which is kind of scary because I do think in our lifetime we're going to see these, I don't know what people refer to them as, kind of climate nomads, where people that are living here it's going to be uninhabitable and they're going to have to move, right? If the Earth continues to heat at the rate it's heating, and let's say sea levels rise, you're going to have all these people, a lot of people around the equator. They're going to have to figure out where they're going to move to. It's kind
It
of
is right
nerve
now.
wracking.
There's the one organization, I don't remember the name, they issued like a map that is showing all the disasters that happened in the world in the recent years, like floods, fires, typhoons, hurricanes, and so on. And they marked in blue the natural one, and in red the one that are climate induced, that are related to climate change. And if you see a big percentage, most of the map is red. Like, so most of the kind of really disasters that we're seeing right now in the world, that we're seeing in the news, are directly derived from what we're doing to our earth and to how we're producing our electricity, because according to the United Nations, 60% of the world's greenhouse gas emissions are directly derived from how we produce our electricity. And unfortunately, even with all the knowledge about renewable energy and climate change, and the fact that the topic is being very high on the news, and on the agenda, and so on, even with that, we see that only 20% of the world's electricity is produced from renewable energy. 80% is produced from traditional polluting sources such as oil, coal, gas, and others. And that's something that we really, I think, need to unite and work on.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of it, I'm generally an optimist. And I think when it comes to climate, I have never seen more energy around it, which is good. But I just feel like we need to go much faster. Right? Yeah, and like you said this earlier, when you look at things that are happening, especially in like Norway and Sweden, like we should be looking up to them in the U.S. and really how to create a movement. And I feel like here we're just moving a little too slow. If you look at some of the initiatives, some of the companies I've talked to, when they have these grand ambitions for like 2030, like, okay, great, you have this target, but what is the work back plan? How do you know you're actually making progress towards that? And that's usually where things kind of fall short. And so I think it requires, more aggressive policy.
More aggressive policies, and somehow to make sure that the commitment of the previous government survives the next government or being continued by the next government. It's very similar to how Trump came to the United States and he canceled the US participation in the climate agreement of Paris. So he decided to pull out. So that's, for example, an example of how like there were so many steps made towards it, and the US was, seen as a leader, and then it just pulled out from the agreement completely. So that's something that we shouldn't be seen. I think that new governments, regardless of their views, should be respectful of policies of previous governments regarding the climate. I think it's very, very important. And one more thing that I would like to add is, I think the reason why there's a lot of discussions, but not a lot of necessarily, or not enough activity around really climate change and renewable energy implementation, is the fact that we really see kind of all these disasters, heat waves, and so on. They're spread around. We see 2 days in the news that there are fires in Brazil, and then one day something happened in the United States and a heat wave in Europe. And it doesn't come with all the sound effects that people sometimes need to understand, like, wow, the situation is not good. Like, I'll go back to Chernobyl that we talked about in the beginning of the conversation. And when Chernobyl exploded, it killed maybe collectively, like Ukraine is saying few tens of people, but probably few thousands people directly, from the pollution in the area. Everybody cared. Like, it was a big boom, a lot of noise, very long fire. The fire effects, were happening for a long, long time. And when people kept seeing it on the news day after day after day, like all the governments sent financial aid, technical aids, robots, like everything was sent there to try and stop the pollution from Chernobyl from leaking out. If you're looking at climate change, it killed by now and kills yearly much more people than Chernobyl ever did. According to the World Health Association, 1 out of 7 people in the whole world die premature death directly resulting from pollution. It's huge amounts, it's like insane. Yet, because it does not come with a big boom, and the big fire effects, like people think it's not as serious, and that's kind of, I think, is the mistake. And when it will come with the big sound effects, maybe it will be too late.
Yeah, maybe it'll be in your own face. But I think what you're talking about for me is also kind of the bullseye. I mean, the reason I'm doing podcasts like this is because I've been spending all this time researching and scouring the web and reading articles, and I've listened to many other podcasts about climate, and they're interesting, but I want to see it. I need to see it, and that's why I'm doing more of a visual approach to this. And I often talk about the end of the Vietnam War with people because I believe in you have to grab people in a way that is deep inside them that causes them to act. And reading it doesn't always do that. And so the end of the Vietnam War in the US, people wanted to get out. I mean, this is before my time. I wasn't even born yet, but I followed it a lot. My mom actually was in Vietnam. She went over there to kind of serve and support the troops. She was not fighting. But people wanted out and there was pressure, but nothing was really happening. The government wasn't really hightailing it out of there until 2 pictures came out. And one was the naked girl running down the street with a napalm. And the other one was there's a picture of a guy shooting a guy in the head. Those photos created so much pressure. The government finally was like, oh, now we need to leave. It was not the stats of millions of people dying. That was not what was doing it. It was 2 pictures. And
Yes.
I think that we need more things that people can see and rally around. And I think sometimes people get very political around climate, and it just doesn't make any sense to me. Like, I don't think politics has any place in climate. Like, we all live on this planet. Like, forget about politics. So I think you're right, though. You need to see it and react to that. Chernobyl was a catastrophic event for sure. And unfortunately, like you're right, people get up in arms on that. But now we're having that kind of everywhere, right? You see the fires and things. And so I think the challenge, of course, is you need to get everybody moving. You need to have politicians saying, okay, we need to react faster, business, and then public pressure, right? We need to have more people, I think, educated in the masses. So when they're talking about climate, they actually know what they're talking about and can really create more public pressure. And so that's part of the opportunity I see is just let's just take this complex topic, let's make it a little easier to understand, and so people can start to act with more actions, which I think people need to do right now. Well, that's fascinating. Also, coming out of I was curious in the Ukraine. I think I shared with you. I actually just did my 23andMe recently, and my father is 100% Ukrainian. I realized that and then my mom I thought was mostly German, but I realized I had like 7% Irish in me now, which is kind of interesting. But do you think in the Ukraine people care much about climate? Like in the hierarchy of needs, is it something that they're like, oh yeah, we're going to get after this? I mean, I feel like there's so many other things. They're so worried about Putin right now over there. You think this is even something they think
Again,
about?
I think specifically for Ukraine, again, they're in a war and they're in a very, I think, difficult situation. So I really think a lot of people
Yeah,
think about how to survive and what's going to happen
yeah.
in the next
It's
day,
about today. Yeah,
rather than renewable energy implementation. With that said, like I just received in my email invitation, like there's from some agency that is giving grants to fund energy projects in Ukraine, renewable energy projects in Ukraine. So there is, I think, a big interest from European Union and from other countries around the world to create energy independence from Ukraine, because not only that they have to be like in a war, in kind of a forced war against Russia, but also like they're very dependent, or were always very dependent on their heating and electricity needs from Russia. Like they were mostly getting Russian gas. I think that kind of creates a very, very weak point to be in when all your energy needs, or most of your energy needs, are coming from somebody that's attacking you. So you can't even trust that, like, at minus 30 or minus 20 degrees Celsius, you will receive any heating or electricity. So I think that other organizations that are providing funding and, like, aid funds for Ukraine are definitely putting effort to create energy independence.
well, as you think about, I'm curious what's next for your company. If you think about the next 5 years, what are you excited about?
So the first thing is definitely the fact that we're coming into the United States. So opening the power station in Los Angeles, hopefully to be followed by additional power stations in the United States, more legislation, because really we were heavily involved in both legislation initiatives, both in New Jersey and in California. We would like to see other states following the same trend and really bringing wave energy to the forefront of these countries' kind of strategic interests. Building the first commercial scale installation, because till now we kind of built all the time proof of concepts in Gibraltar, in Israel, now in Los Angeles, because every new country that we come to first wants to see a technology working in a smaller scale, that it can safely
Yeah.
connect to the electrical grid, that it's reliable and so on, and only then to do a larger scale. We recently entered a concession agreement of 20 megawatts in Portugal, in the city of Porto in Portugal, and the first phase there will be a 1 megawatt power station, which is the first time that we will be building a megawatt scale installation. So really showing to the world that not only we can solve these 5 problems that dominated the offshore energy kind of companies, not only that we can be cost efficient, reliable, environmentally friendly, insurable, and safely connect to the electrical grid, but we can also produce large energy amounts and become profitable. And that's something you can achieve only when you go commercial scale. So that's definitely one of the top goals of the company.
Yeah, that's always an exciting time. When you think of companies and chapters, there's the early prove it out phase. And then if you're lucky, you get to this rapid scale phase, which is exciting and also comes a lot of headaches, right? Because then you got to scale your entire operations, which is a whole nother animal to get after. But it's really cool if you can think about, like you said, that the sky's the limit. If you can really prove this out, what you're doing, there's just so much potential to really scale out there.
Okay, right now the world is open, right now there's not really a lot of wave energy being implemented, so
Yeah.
big
Oh,
growth.
exactly. Well, I'm trying to think. I know we're kind of at time, but trying to think of anything that anyone listening might be, any. I always like to think of something like, okay, for the average person listening, what can they do? Maybe it's just in your case, voting for people that care about this. But I was trying to think of, any tips for people that just, might be listening to this.
Depends. So basically, putting wave energy on the agenda. So if it's with educational tools, if it's really with pressuring relevant people in the government, in the municipality, in the ports, because these breakwaters that we connect to, for example, are always kind of owned by different entities. A lot of different organizations can come in and support it. It can be also the Navy. In the US, the Navy tried, from what I know, from what I read in the news, tried to develop wave energy, again, offshore wave energy themselves. They even tested the device in Hawaii, which I assume didn't end so well because we didn't hear about it ever since. Even private organizations, many private organizations right now are trying to decrease their emissions by implementing renewable energy projects. Even companies like Google, for example, they want to show that they're at net zero emissions. Google, Microsoft, all these huge companies that are located or their headquarters are located in the United States can definitely do their part as well. If they're polluting with their big servers and other kind of, huge offices and other kind of electricity needs that they have, they can also be giving back. I think if it's a private industry, if it's a private person, if it's a public person, like everybody can do their part.
Well, thank you so much, Ina, for being here. For anyone that wants to learn more, you can go to ecowavepower.com. And I'll include some videos on here as well. But it really fascinating story, and just thank you so much for giving me some time.
Thank you. And maybe we can add that also EcoWave Power is publicly traded in the US on the Nasdaq under the Wave.
That's right. Check them out there as well. All right, thank you.
Thank you very much, Nick.